First one we're going to talk about is somebody I've mentioned a couple times in previous episodes, and I've always wanted to concentrate on her if we ever got to a writer episode, and here we are. Let me talk about Leigh Brackett.
I always wanted to talk about her if we were in a lockdown quarantine situation.
Pull the cord. It's happening. This segment's going to be called Sincerely Muscles. We'll get to it.
I thought we were done with Tarzan, but okay.
Leigh Brackett was born on December 7th, 1915, a day that will live long before Pearl Harbor was attacked. She's a hometown hero, born and raised in Santa Monica, and an address I cannot find for the life of me. She was raised by her mother.
Back then?
What?
Did they have addresses back then?
Yeah, you're by the Rock. You're 2 houses down from the Rock.
Do you live on beach or road?
She was raised by her mother, Margaret, and her maternal grandparents after her dad died of the flu pandemic of 1919 that swept the globe.
2 authors so far affected by this, seriously.
Her family moved around the country quite a bit before...
Who said we're not topical?
Who said they're not relevant?
Who said they're not funny?
Crowd? You're jeering us.
Who said that they're calling the police?
Her family moved around the country quite a bit before settling down in Los Angeles. I can't even find out whereabouts. Like, her early years are kind of like the same 5 things over and over, but I can't find where they lived. I know that she at some point lived when she was pretty young in Pasadena, not far from the home of Howard Hawks. I don't even know if he was living there at the time, though. Like Burroughs, she moved around quite a bit. Her education was not stable.
Mm-hmm. Authors are dumb. We know that.
We know that, right? Her moment comes when she's 8 years old, when someone gives her a copy of Edgar Rice Burroughs' The Gods of Mars, and she says,
wow.
I was never the same after that. Suddenly, I became aware of other worlds out there, and then, from that time on, I was destined to be a science fiction writer.
I've already, me, as Edgar Rice Burroughs, have already influenced both of your people. Take that. What the hell have you done for me?
I guess I'll be reading your research now?
I'm not touching that paper.
Come on, touch it. Shake my hand. Shake my hand.
Don't stop being rude and shake my hand.
I did a good job. Shake my hand. She attended a private girls' school in Santa Monica and was, by all accounts...
Just like Edgar Rice Burroughs.
That's how she knew him.
They were dual prom queens.
She was, by all accounts, a tomboy. She was tall, she was rebellious, and she was athletic. All the things you need to be a pulp action hero. She excelled at volleyball.
Androgynous.
Her most tomboy characteristic was reading books meant for boys, like the works of Robert E. Howard, who created Conan, C.L. Moore, who I didn't know was a female until I started doing research, Edgar Rice Burroughs, and H. Rider Haggard.
Haggard?
Haggard. Haggard.
Oh, like Merle Haggard.
Like Merle Haggard, yeah.
Merle Haggard's his little boy.
She was a lifelong fan of science fiction, and much of her fiction was born out of her love of Tarzan and John Carter stories. She was so excited by these stories that she began, of course, writing her own amazing stories around the age of 13. Another influence was the theater program at her school, where she was introduced to plays, and from what I could tell, was writing them and watching them performed. She declined as
Gumption.
What?
Gumption.
She declined a college scholarship.
How many times are you going to have to say what?
What? She declined this college scholarship because she knew it was going to be too pricey for her family to handle, but she kept writing and submitting stories to the pulp sci-fi magazine she was poring over. Again, the exact timeline of how and what years her career started going are hard to trace, but I'm going to try to do my best, and feel free to correct me if you know the biography of Leigh Brackett. Her grandfather was a great support to her in getting her to sell her stories first, who seems to be the only family member who supported her writing science fiction. A lot of people were like, why don't you write for Ladies' Home Journal? She's like, I don't read it, and if I did, I wouldn't be able to write for them, but they pay well, so I wish I could.
Do they publish stories about little green aliens?
I have a story about a fist that comes to life on its own. Does Ladies' Home Journal... Will they take that? But another big help came from a fellow writer. She was attending writing courses taught by a well-known author writing self-help books, Lawrence D'Orsay, himself a writer of stories that frequently ended up in literary magazines like Weird Tales. D'Orsay had his own literary agency, D'Orsay Agency, and at some point, a man working at D'Orsay Agency comes across her manuscript, and he finds it in the bad pile, and he saves it. This is up-and-coming writer Henry Kuttner, who I've mentioned on this podcast a couple times before. Not a spectacular writer, but a great haver of ideas.
Never heard of him.
We've even based like a creepy Christmas Hanukkah intro on Graveyard Rats, which is his big one.
No, that was me. That was
all
original.
Me, baby. I hold him up there with Charles Beaumont. Like, his writing isn't anything spectacular, but the ideas you're reading are like, oh, this is frightening and upsetting.
This would make a good 30-minute TV show.
It might.
Occasionally would make a good 30-minute TV show.
Anyways, Kuttner saved Brackett's stories from being rejected. He saw her what Brackett called limping efforts at sci-fi and fantasy and wrote her. On his own time, he wrote her and gave her a long and detailed criticism of her story, which I would have cried.
That doesn't sound like a man to do to a woman.
Here's what you should do with the punchline.
Unwarranted critique of something she worked really hard on.
This peer support out of nowhere must have fueled her to keep going at a time when most writers are feeling really worthless. He helped her get an agent, which was, of course, his own agent. But the biggest influence he had on Brackett, though, other than critiquing her stories, was introducing her to the gang. Robert Heinlein, Forrest Ackerman,
they jumped her in.
Julius Shorts, Jack Williamson, Edmund Hamilton, and the fellow new kid on the block, a guy just out of high school, Ray Bradbury, and the many, many others of the Los Angeles Science Fantasy Society. This year was 1939. She was 24 years old, and Leigh Brackett found her people. She quickly joined their ranks, both spiritually and officially joining the group.
She spiritually paid her membership dues, which was a big bowl of Jell-O for everybody from Clifton's.
Which is just free limeade, apparently. This dude doesn't like a cut of our jib.
No, that's the look of a fan.
A faraway
glare who's
kind of
walking,
like a vulture,
strutting very slowly in circles around us. I like him. I want to shake his hand.
What's your name, sir? She also would frequently join an informal, unofficial group that would meet at Robert Heinlein's home on Lookout Mountain up Laurel Canyon in the Hollywood Hills, close to Houdini's mansion at 8777 Lookout Mountain. The group was called the Manana Literary Society, and they would just like have fun and drinks at his house and go over stories and talk pulp with fans and writers.
Did they ever go to Edgar Rice Burroughs' house for a movie? They're not that far.
Why not? Like, you know what I mean? Like, they were close enough. That's the thing. I never read, like, they must have met Burroughs at some point, but
well, he was, at that point, that's like, we're doing open mic comedy. Certainly we'll run into Jerry Seinfeld. And we'll just, he'll invite us over.
That's true, though.
Which is the dream.
He comes out of the bathroom. I need to go in the bathroom. We have that weird, like, who's going to go first? And
then we both go in the bathroom.
He's helping me write jokes.
Suddenly, it's a mirror in the bathroom situation.
The next year, her first short story, Martian Quest, was published in Astounding Science Fiction in their February issue. This was followed by The Treasure of Patukuth in the same publication, Astounding Magazine. Between 1940 and 1943, she pumped out a series of short stories that would be published in Planet Stories, Startling Stories, and Super Science Fiction.
They were stories,
fiction stories, story fictions,
book stories, magazine, the magazine,
short stories,
science, the fiction,
short story, long stories, the short stories,
short story, long story short.
They were said to be like simple, almost forgettable, but her writing continues at this point to get better, and it all leads to a short story she wrote in 1944 for the spring issue of Thrilling Wonder Stories called The Veil of Astalar.
I wish we could keep a tally of the stupid names we've gone over so far.
Oh, for sure.
Like John Carter.
Imagine, like, I got a name for a stupid publication that I'm sure isn't taken, and you say it like, that's taken. Oh, I gotta be
that was written 4 different times by 8 different famous writers. But also, what a stupid name Tarzan is. Like, it's such a common name to us now, but, like, imagine when it first came out. Like, what? People must have been like this. What?
Why can't his name be like Adam?
He's
the first man.
How about instead of Tarzan and Jane, Adam and Jane?
Am I right? Crowd over there, they're walking away.
Am I right? Crowd of eugenic supporters.
So The Veil of Astalar was like, it was her first change in like ability. Like, it was markedly different, well written, and significantly different space opera. That was what she was really good at, was something called space operas.
Interesting.
Her skill at handling.
I wonder if that skill set will come in handy.
Probably not. Her skill at handling space operas and planetary romances will come into play later. Oh, you must have read my.
I wonder if that. Wait, what?
Sentence will come into later.
Wait, that echo delay.
That's funny. Things were looking up, and her friends group seemed to be the exact support system she needed in her life. She was dating fellow sci-fi writer Edmund World Wrecker Hamilton. He was nicknamed that because in every story at the last chapter, Earth would be saved. Very last chapter. And every Sunday, Leigh Brackett would meet the new kid, Ray Bradbury, at Muscle Beach at the volleyball court in Venice, and the two would critique each other's stories about her at Muscle Beach.
Wait a minute. Why there?
Oh, because she would frequently play volleyball at Muscle Beach.
Okay.
And so she would make him go there. I think he was in, I forgot what area he was in.
And that's how Ray Bradbury got so ripped?
You've heard that story, right?
You've seen the montage, right?
You've seen the Top Gun montage, right? But except it was Leigh Brackett and Ray Bradbury. About her at Muscle Beach.
He was preparing for the apocalypses he was so afraid of.
She was a swimming instructor there as well, and Bradbury once saw her playing volleyball with the men during World War II. She would send postcards out to Bradbury signed Muscles. She was the real deal. Fans of these genre magazines took an almost instant liking to Leigh Brackett's stories, but readers would often mistake her for a him due to the gender-neutral name. The editor, Joseph Campbell, started a letter column of an issue with a bold headline, "The Leigh in Leigh Brackett is feminine." And you wouldn't believe the responses.
Believe it.
Nobody cared because they were just such a big fan of how good she was.
Yeah. Did they?
Yeah, no, they really did. Some publication did that annoying thing. I don't know if it's annoying or if it's great, but they would make a point of being like, "What are you doing?"
My foot is itchy, and I'm wearing very big boots, and I don't want to interrupt the show, so I'm clicking my heels together to scratch my foot.
I just want to go home so bad.
There's no place like quarantine. There's no place like quarantine.
A lot of publications would do that annoying thing. I don't know if it's annoying or great, but like, can you believe the writer of these incredibly imaginary, visionary stories is a woman? Like, it sucks because obviously.
Where'd she find the time between menstruating and breastfeeding?
Yeah, and cleaning the kitchen. But like, her name is getting out there more because of this. And like, girls or women or boys who look up to women like me, they look out there and they see a female figure doing this. They're like, oh, I could probably do it.
Pervert.
When she stops getting printed as frequently due to other job opportunities that we'll get to, readers send letters to pulp magazines asking, when will Leigh Brackett come back? And when was in capital letters, bring back Brackett. So she was popular. People really liked her.
Written with cutout letters from different magazines.
I swear to God, if you don't bring her back right now.
I have her. Bring her back.
Bring her back. At the same time, she started also writing pulp mystery and hard-boiled crime stories between 1943 and 1945.
She's like the bridge between all of our authors.
She kind of is, yeah. She's kind of like the John Carter of both these worlds, huh? She's something of a Confederate soldier on Mars.
She's like our, I'm trying to think of another Southern general, and it's good that I can't. Keep going.
Between 43 and 45, she writes about 8 short stories for small mystery publications like New Detective and Thrilling Detective. Her first full-length novel was published in 1944, and it was a crime one, No Good from a Corpse. And other than the screenplays she's known for, this is one of the 2 books that define her. Some people disagree, some people strongly agree that Brackett had a thing for dialogue that many other writers at her level didn't have, and in particular could write fantastically accurate dialogue from men, which she learned from studying characters like old drunk William Faulkner, old drunk Ernest Hemingway, old drunk Dashiell Hammett, and the granddaddy of all the old drunks, Raymond Chandler. Her first novel is said to be cut from the Chandler mold, which is both a praise and a put-down. But it's that book, No Good from a Corpse, that moves her into the next phase of her career. Leigh Brackett was with the Myron Selznick agency, Myron being the brother of David O. Selznick, the Hollywood producer, and her agent was Hugh King. Of the strength of her novel, King was able to shoehorn Brackett into a job as a screenwriter for a horror film called The Vampire's Ghost at Republic Pictures. As Brackett said, they decided to cash in on the Universal Monsters School, and I had been doing science fiction, and to them it all looked the same, bug-eyed monsters, so she got hired. She then got another job the next year writing the screenplay for a movie called Crime Doctor's Manhunt, which was directed by William Castle.
It has to be just like a bucket of words here, a bucket of words there, you got science fiction.
You have 3 dice with words, and you roll it. Red, planets,
glasses.
Ghost. Yeah.
The glasses from Planet Ghost.
It was directed by William Castle, of course, and the cast included William Frawley.
Really?
Yeah. But someone working for Howard Hawks was buying up little to unknown pulp novels and came across No Good for a Corpse, which they then passed on to Hawks. Hawks found it to be really impressive, so he gets his secretary to call this Brackett fellow. So Howard Hawks is on the phone.
And make sure he's wearing a jock strap.
Tell him to put his penis on the phone. So he pretty much is like, tell that guy Brackett to come over here, and she shows up.
Meet me in the men's room.
Yeah, are you Brackett, secretary? And she's like, Mrs. Brackett, I'm Leigh Brackett, the writer. And he's like, well, okay. But he's like, fine, whatever. I just need you to do this new project. Hawks sought Brackett because he was adapting Raymond Chandler's The Big Sleep for the big screen. But there's a problem. At the time that she was hired to write the first legitimate and big job of her life, she was also neck deep in a sci-fi story with an upcoming deadline that needed to be finished for Planet Stories called Lorelei of the Red Mist. She had written the line, then it was gone, and the immediate menace of the foreground took all of Stark's attention. Now, Howard Hawks and The Big Sleep stood in the way of her finishing it. She didn't quite know what to do, but then it flashed. She would turn to her friend and mentee for help, so she goes to Ray Bradbury and asks him if he could finish this story for her.
These are wait a minute. She went to Ray Bradbury to finish The Big Sleep?
No.
Oh, the other one.
The story she was writing, Lorelei of the Red Mist.
Okay.
She has to finish that. She has a deadline, so she goes to Ray Bradbury. It's like, can you finish this story? So he agreed. Bradbury added the following sentence to hers. He saw the flock herded by more of the golden hounds. He then continued and finished Lorelei of the Red Mist in 10 days. What exists is a collaborative story, a half and half between 2 of the biggest names in pulp sci-fi history. His work allowed her to move on to a bigger collaboration. On this project, not only would she be working with Howard Hawks and Humphrey Bogart and drunk Raymond Chandler, but on the writing team was the drunk William Faulkner, which we covered
for The Big Sleep.
For The Big Sleep.
This is crazy. This is the perfect storm of
if you want to know
writers who don't want to be there.
Yeah, I know. With all of these drunks. And then Leigh Brackett. What was that like? She answered for a book of interviews called Backstory to Interviews with Screenwriters of the 40s and 50s. This is what she says. I went to the studio the first day and absolutely appalled. I've been writing pulp stories for about 3 years, and here's William Faulkner, who was one of the great literary lights of the day. And how am I going to work with him? What have I got to offer, as it were? This was quickly resolved because I walked into the office. Faulkner came out of the office with the big sleep, and he put it down and said, I have worked out what we're going to do. We're going to do alternate sections. I will do these chapters, and you will do those chapters. And that was the way it had been done. He went back into his office, and I didn't see him again. So the collaboration was quite simple. I never saw what he did, and he never saw what I did. We just turned our stuff into hawks. I think everybody got very confused. It's a very confusing book if you sit down and tear it apart. When you read it from page, this is still her talking.
We'll get into that also with the flaws in Raymond Chandler.
Yeah. When you read it from page to, I'm quoting her still. When you read it from page to page, it moves so beautifully that you don't care. But when you start tearing it apart to see what makes it tick, it becomes unglued. Owen Taylor, I believe, was the name of the chauffeur. I was down on set one day, and Bogart came up to me and said, who killed Owen Taylor? And I said, I don't know. Who got hold of William Faulkner? And he said, well, I don't know. So we sent a wire to Chandler. He sent another back and said, I don't know.
I have that same story.
Do you?
Yeah, I'll tell you the other side. I'll tell you what he was doing at home.
At home, when he got the wire, it was like, who the hell's Owen Taylor? Is that a president?
What's a chauffeur?
So there they were. The movie was a huge success, but I always felt like both Brackett and Faulkner never got enough credit for adapting it.
Is this still Brackett talking?
No, this is me talking. I feel like it's always like a weird fact. Like, did you know William Faulkner and Leigh Brackett?
That's pretty crazy. And it also, like, that system of, like, you know, you do in school, like, you write a sentence, and I'll write a sentence, and then you'll write a sentence. Like, that never turns into a good story.
No, that's the way group projects are done.
Exactly.
It was a joke for a lot of years that he walked over and ripped the book in half and said, this is your part. But, like, it wasn't far off.
He must have been at Muscle Beach. It used to be Author Beach. It used to be Writer Beach, but it was confused with Ride, like Ride the Waves, Write the Waves. And then all the authors got ripped.
The whole generation, right? Hemingway. And maybe that's just about it. They never got enough credit for adapting it. With an emphasis, I mean that on Brackett. The dialogue in the movie is snappy, and not all the credit can go to Chandler, and certainly less to Faulkner. Brackett said, one day, Humphrey Bogart came over to me with a manuscript and asked if I had written the cues. I said no, and he said, they cannot be said. I'm not going to do an impression of him. You see, William Faulkner, this is her still talking. You see, William Faulkner wrote wonderful...
This broad talks a lot.
I mean, like, get back in the whatever, right?
Get back in the writer's room.
You see, William Faulkner
wrote... Get back in the president's office.
William Faulkner wrote wonderful Faulkner dialogues, but they were not written to be uttered. Faulkner went down in history as a screenwriter whose every single line was rewritten in Hollywood. If you want to hear about Faulkner's miserable time in Hollywood, you can go back and listen to our episode Hollywood and Bust, an episode where I managed to mispronounce everything.
Hollywood or Bust, not Hollywood and Bust.
I thought it was Hollywood and Bust.
Why would it be Hollywood and Bust?
Because they went and they still busted.
Hollywood or Bust. I'm pretty sure. Let's just shake hands on this.
Come over.
Okay.
Name in the middle.
I freaking dare you. That almost sounds like a dream team of... Are there two people looking at your car right now? No, it was two old people. The perspective, there's two people crouched far from your car, but the forced perspective.
Right here. Look at me.
Look at me. I'm the old man now. That almost sounds like the dream team of, like, we could get metaphors from William Faulkner. We could get dialogue from Raymond Chandler.
Yeah.
We could get plot points from Leigh Brackett.
Yeah.
And then we can get drinks from...
We can get drinks from Raymond Chandler's office. We can get girls from Howard Hawks' catalog of women. I like The Big Sleep. I probably enjoy it more than The Maltese Falcon, but The Maltese Falcon is probably a better movie. But I don't hear any... I guess I haven't read enough Faulkner other than a couple of short stories to, like, oh, that's a Faulkner line. I can kind of hear some snappy stuff from Brackett, but I always attribute it to Chandler, so it's hard to tell where the lines divide.
That's why collaboration is bad.
Yeah, because you
don't get all the credit.
I want capitalism, not communism.
I'm in this for me.
Raymond Chandler is said to have visited the studio and was very pleased with the job Leigh Brackett had done with his novel. But a union strike put the brakes on a lot of productions that summer, and Leigh Brackett would have to hold off on writing another screenplay for Hawks for the time being because there's no more scriptwriting stuff available. It should also be said the same year, 1946, New Year's Eve, Leigh Brackett and Edmund Hamilton get married. Their best man is Ray Bradbury. From that point on, Edmund and Leigh live half in an alley apartment.
You're my Ray Bradbury.
What?
You're my Ray Bradbury.
I'm your Ray Bradbury. Edmund and Leigh live half in LA in their apartment and half on his family's ranch in Kinsman, Ohio. Ugh. They later in life left the LA apartment and moved to Lancaster. After The Big Sleep and the strike, Brackett returned to her space novels. The rest of her career would be moving between screenplays and genre novels and some more short stories. Her next big story comes in 1951 with The Black Amazon of Mars, which is the most easily accessible of her books. Accessible meaning you could find it for free online everywhere. Not accessible, though, in, like, plot, and the story starts off like right in the middle, like someone's dying, the names are like impronounceable. If you're into it, you're into it. If you struggle with reading pulp sci-fi that's like deep sci-fi, it can be kind of a fight. But she writes really imaginary stuff.
I've never seen any of her books anywhere at all.
I saw a lot of them online, like through Overdrive and stuff, but at the last bookstore they have like a nice shelf of her stuff that I'll buy like a couple every once in a while.
Well, they'll be out of business by the time this is out, so I'll never read it.
It certainly was the last bookstore. Got him. Oh, got us.
Got the Academy.
Yeah. She keeps writing novels: Shadow Over Mars, The Starman, Alpha Centauri, or Die, and possibly her best known novels are The Long Tomorrow and The Sword of Rhiannon. Her novel, The Big Jump, I read maybe 6 months ago, and I loved it. It's like pulp macho stuff with space. She writes dialogue so tough and so snappy. As snappy as Hammond and Chandler. And the end doesn't land well, but if you read Chandler, you're already accustomed to that. So it's just
you
that
don't
in
expect an ending.
space. Like The Big Jump, I really enjoyed. There's something about The Big Jump where a guy is going to go to... Okay, so The Big Jump basically is about this spacecraft got farther than any spacecraft could. It made this jump like light speed. It made this jump, and this guy went, and spacecraft came back without anybody on it, and a friend. It's a relationship that's really weird because they're kind of friends, but they're kind of not. But he wants to go rescue the guy anyways, like almost on principle. Like, he saved my life, and I have to do the same for him. Like, like the relationships are really good. Anyways, The Big Jump.
This book will never be on shelves again. So.
I lend my copy to everybody.
That I see what you. That's good.
I'm clever, huh? Her best-known reoccurring character, a character that's synonymous with her if you're a deep-cut sci-fi reader, is Eric John Stark, who is Tarzan meets Conan but on Mars. Stark is an Earthman raised by native Mercurians. If you're from Mercury, you're Mercurian.
Yeah.
After his real Earth parents,
I don't know that.
After his real Earth parents die when a cave collapses, the tribe that raises him gets destroyed by a group of human miners who imprisoned him, and he is rescued and raised by a police officer. His upbringing and experiences make him aware of the injustices that native planetary species deal with, and he helps to fight against colonization and genocide.
That's much deeper than, hey, at least she's fighting genocide.
Yeah, she's not John Carter. Because he spent so much time on Mars. I went to a talk at LAPL about 9 years ago. I think it was 2012. Ripe of maybe a few months before I moved to Chico. And there was a guy, I cannot find any programming about it, but he gave a whole lecture on pulp sci-fi. So he introduced me to Henry Kuttner and Leigh Brackett. I got a better idea of Leigh Brackett. But here's the thing. He went into each story and gave what was really interesting about it. And the interesting thing about Eric John Stark is that because he spent so much time on Mars... What?
Isn't that a Game of Thrones... That's the fifth what? Isn't that a Game of Thrones name? John Stark?
Yeah. You got to sue George R.
Who's already being sued by J.R.R.
Tolkien. Yeah.
Who's already being sued by Edgar R. Burroughs.
Who's being sued by a broken train.
He's still being hunted down by the sheep people.
Because Eric John Stark spends so much time on Mars, his skin is a dark, deep black as his hair. To this, I say hell yeah. A lot of ice castles and his...
Wait a minute, but there's only white people from the south on Mars.
Oh, not Mars. Oh, Mercury. No, Eric John Stark of Mars, or John Carter of Mars. I'm getting them all confused.
They're all the same. This is why people don't respect pulp stuff, is because they all turn into the same thing.
She continues through the 50s and 60s. What?
Which is... Nothing.
Thank you. This is a good... I can hear you. I'm trying to make a point to shut up. She continues through all the 50s and 60s writing tales about Eric John Stark and Mars and the Skaith. She eventually was called back by Howard Hawks, who had her under a contract for 2 more scripts, but that wasn't the only reason he called her, though. Hawks admired her.
Oh, no.
He said that they shared the same literary taste. She was sophisticated, she dressed in somewhat outdoorsy manner, which he liked, and more importantly, her understanding of comradeship, both in fiction and in life, and her ability to create tough-talking dames. That's everything that Hawks loved. So he just loved having her around. He respected her work, which was the most important thing. In 1957, there's no but other than he would pay her less than he would min. In 1957, she started to write Rio Bravo with Jules Firth. That's the John Wayne, Ricky Nelson, Dean Martin Western. His liking for Brackett did not translate well into the banks, like I said. Jules Firth was paid $2,500 a week, and he hated to put anything down on paper. And Brackett, who busted her ass writing, got paid $600 a week. She also worked on Hatari and went criminally underpaid for that too. She also wrote the original screenplay for El Dorado and said it was one of the best things she had ever written, but Hawks changed key points in it. She did uncredited and writing and rewriting for the Rock Hudson movie, Man's Favorite Sport, which I watched 20 minutes of.
I can tell you man's favorite sport for Rock Hudson.
It's, man.
The most dangerous sport and
man.
my favorite sport.
I watched 20 minutes of it, and I've been dying to rewatch it, but I can't find it anywhere. She also wrote Rio Lobo, The Gold of the Seven Saints, and a few other movies through the 60s and 70s. But let's get to her last couple big things. 1973, Philip Marlowe has one more case for her when Robert Altman asked her to create a screenplay for The Long Goodbye starring Elliot Gould. Adapting this one would prove to be difficult because it was easily Chandler's longest and most convoluted novel, so dissecting it and reconstructing it for the screen was challenging. Even though fans appreciated it, Chandler fans hated it, even though it is through and through a 70s movie.
Yeah.
It's bleak and it's dirty.
A lot of chest hair.
Oh my god, so much chest hair. And is there nudity in it?
Probably. I mean, it's the 70s. It was nudity and they didn't even think twice about it.
Yeah, there's just like
a naked woman and a kid walks by in the scene and they're like, that's good for him.
Yeah. Oh, we're setting the mood. Turtleneck City. A sail on
Turtleneck City, but just the neck and then chest hair.
That's how you know he's a bad guy. The next thing comes, and to me, it's it.
Talk about chest hair.
The Granddaddy. Although I'm sure no one really knew it. It was shortly after this little movie called Star Wars.
Which another, after all these stupid titles, like, yep, that's
another, yeah. To his credit, he was trying to recreate that.
Yeah.
So Brackett's a perfect fit for that. George Lucas wanted to put the second movie into production shortly after he had changed the world with the first one. So who should he go to but the queen of space operas, the Madame of the Starry-Eyed Pulps, Leigh Brackett. Lucas paid her a flat fee of $50,000 to put forth a draft of the sequel for A New Hope. The two brainstormed ideas, and she worked up a draft, and its draft is a majority of what we see in Empire Strikes Back. Her screenplay isn't word per word what was used in the movie, but the motions of the most of the things are thanks to Brackett. The reveal of Darth Vader being Luke's dad was not in the original script she wrote. In her draft, Vader is a fallen Jedi out to kill Luke, based just solely on vengeance. His dad's ghost is revealed to him on Dagobah while he's training with a slightly different Yoga. Luke has a twin sister, but it isn't Leia. And we get more of Lando's story that he's a surviving clone trooper. These are all Leigh Brackett's.
That's weird to include a clone thing that early on.
Because she knew the idea of the Clone Wars sounded pretty cool.
Cool enough for Lando Calrissian.
Unfortunately, shortly after turning her screenplay in, Leigh Brackett died of cancer. A truly tragic loss. Lucas also confessed to not liking her draft and sat with Lawrence.
He said that at her funeral.
This is my eulogy. He sat with Lawrence Kasdan and the director. They made like 2 new drafts based on hers. Her original screenplay exists online, and Lucas dedicated the film to her and managed to get the Writers Guild to recognize it and give her credit by submitting her draft to them and not his own. But listen, George Lucas not liking your take on Star Wars is a good thing. I've read snippets online of dialogue between Han and Leia when they're trying to outrun the Empire, and it's something really special. I really like the way they talk to each other in her draft. Her absolute love of the genre and her ability to write outlandishly fantastical worlds and plots but keep real dialogue makes her something truly magical. That same year, 1978, her name was immortalized in another up-and-coming renegade director's work. He was making a movie in LA about a killer on the loose, and the sheriff of the small town is named Leigh Brackett. The director is John Carpenter, and the movie is Halloween, the movie that started the slasher genre. Long live Leigh Brackett.
Interesting.